Great. Okay, so I'm dropping in the chat meeting materials for today. And I'll walk through the agenda in just a second. Good morning. This is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. I see 4 steering committee members here, so thanks everyone. That's enough for us to get going. In those materials I dropped in the chat is an agenda. I'm going to go ahead and share it on the screen to get going. I've already found a typo that I put in the agenda. Points if you can find it. But we'll approve minutes. We do have minutes to approve this time. We'll do that. We basically are doing 2 things here. We want to look at the agenda for next week. It's not the 14th, obviously, that's today. It's for November 20th. So we have a draft agenda that's linked in the materials. We'll look at that and make sure we're on the right track. Then we want to look at some draft agenda ideas for December 16th. In there's not a separate document. There's just what I have put in here as a sort of real bare bones outlines of agenda. So we want to look at that and see if we're hitting the mark with that. And then the final thing we're going to do today is look at a greater level of detail around writing responsibilities for January to March. There's a lot of writing that needs to happen. And so Jane's going to lead us through an exercise to sort of really think through who's on first base and how that's going to look to get us to a draft plan by the end of March. That's it. We have some public comment at the end. And thanks everyone for joining us today. Before we jump into it, any questions on the agenda? Okay, great. Well, let's dive in. There are minutes here on the website from last time. I'll give folks just a minute to click through and look at them. We've been very appreciative of everyone catching the typos and the other problems we've had. So thank you for that. Any questions about the minutes? Any concerns? Anyone need a little more time? Okay.
Look
So
good.
not hearing concerns. Yeah, Jared, you all good? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. We'll consider those approved. Thanks, everyone. All right, so the first thing we wanted to do is look at our agenda for next week at the council. If you remember from our last steering committee meeting, we thought it was too long to wait until December to have a meeting. And there's 2 things that would be particularly helpful to do with the council. One is about all the public input that's happening right now in these weeks and to get a look across that input that's happening. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is to just get an update from subcommittee co-chairs. But let's look at the agenda, at least the draft proposed agenda. For a just transition reflection, we thought it would be time to explicitly have the conversation. Remember how the council approved the way to handle public comment for subcommittee meetings and trying to weave it in throughout the meeting and things like that. And we said, let's see how that goes and then bring that up to the full council in the way the council does its public comment. So we thought it'd be helpful to do that. And Kelly, I'd put you down to help us look at that without asking you.
That's
So,
fine.
is that
I'll be
good?
on camera in a minute here, just finishing breakfast.
Yeah, great. Okay, so that's our just transition reflection, asking the council if they'd like to adopt the way that subcommittees are doing the public comment for itself. All right, Jane?
I just wanted to acknowledge that we should probably make sure subcommittee co-chairs who are coming to this meeting know about that too, because while Kelly would be great to help you facilitate that, it's really a question of the other subcommittees as well about how it's been going, time permitting, agenda planning, XYZ.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we will be inviting them to this meeting anyway, so in theory, they should all be there. But we may give them, what I'm taking away from what you're saying, Jane, is let's give them a heads up that we'd like them for that first section too. Okay. All right, and so that's that. And then the next piece, sorry, I was just taking notes while we're talking. Public engagement. And our thought on this was, if you remember how we did it with the council in September, where we had a bunch of materials and we actually did a little reading time and then we did some reflection on it. We're thinking of something similar for this 40-minute block, where our goal is to get out tomorrow or at the latest Monday a package of summaries from the different public input sessions that have been happening, as well as some of the other engagement that's been happening. For instance, we did the CBI team with Sophie from Jane's office did a really interesting engagement with linguistically diverse Vermonters a couple weekends ago. That was really powerful. Some of you were there. And we have a summary from that. And so we have some material that we'll send out in advance. And then in the moment, we'll have a short PowerPoint. And then we'll give people some reading time to pick one of those summaries and just read it. And then we'll have a discussion about what we're hearing in the public input. So welcome thoughts about how to do that. I personally thought the way it worked in September was pretty good. And so replicating that seemed like a good idea, but open to ideas on that. And there's a lot that's happening, right? We're having like 6 input sessions, which will be done by next week. We won't have the results from the Cap and Invest input stuff that's happening, but we will have some other stuff. Okay. Oh, and there's we've been doing, I say we, the sort of CBI team with Jane's office, Sophie, have been doing a couple sessions with CAP agencies, as in community action program agencies, around various topics. And that's been really interesting. So we have some summaries out of that work too. Jane, is that a new hand or an old hand? Sorry, I lost track.
New hand, switching to
Yeah.
computer, but
Nice.
I do just want to put a finer point on the Cap and Invest study, which is yeah, sort of parallel track of what is happening with the climate action plan and of interest to the council likely. And just want to say that, you know, we are having focus groups around that study right now, and also had public meetings back in October about it as well. And our thought process has been that would require a separate and longer conversation with the council. And we've been thinking about that as one of the February meetings that we planned with the steering committee. The last time we met would be a meeting that was very focused on a deep dive into the technical analysis supporting this cap, which would mean we would spend a significant amount of time around the Cap and Invest, also give counselors like prep time with some of the public meeting videos we did back in October are really helpful grounding for counselors who don't understand Cap and Invest. Some of us have been learning about it for 3 or 4 years on this job now, and I'm still like learning how it works. So that meeting, those meetings and that video for that meeting is a really good sort of 101 on Cap and Invest. And we'll start to send out materials to prep counselors, but really that February meeting will be where we can spend a deeper amount of time talking about it, and then also use that meeting to talk about the update to the BAU and any scenario planning. So for folks who like technical analysis, that'll be a great meeting. For folks who don't, it'll be a lot of technical analysis, but that's our thought.
Thanks, Jane. Right. Hence why we won't go there next week for all those reasons. Okay, so that's the public engagement piece. And then the next piece is updates from subcommittee co-chairs. And here, the idea is to ask the co-chairs to just say, where have you been spending the most time? And what are the issues that are really, you expect are going to be challenging issues, that to give a little preview to the council around what some of those issues are going to be. And so that's what we're expecting to do. We prepped it up for the 3 subcommittees that are creating substantive recommendations. That said, if there's something else that just transitions or science and data feel like they need to put on the table in this section, that's fine too. But we were really focusing on the things that, the three subcommittees that are going to have to show up in December 16th and with their recommendations. Okay. That's the meeting. Let me pause for a second and say, any questions about that? Ways to make that better? How you feeling about it?
Just a very minor thing I put in the chat, just a
Oh.
note about a typo before the agenda goes out.
Thank you.
And that's for that 11 a.m. line, the updates from subcommittee co-chairs.
The most challenging issues. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Any other thoughts on this, or does this look like the right kind of meeting for next week?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have raised
Yeah,
my
go,
hand.
go, just jump in. There's
right.
more crowd.
I think sort of providing a little bit of context for counselors may be important, and maybe that comes from Liz or Jane, whoever sends the information out, since this is an additional meeting. And just very much to the point you made, David, and kind of teeing up this conversation, there's a lot of drafting that has to get done over the next several months, and just want to make sure our subcommittees that are going to be doing the lion's share of that work feel supported and sort of prepared for what lies ahead. And I guess the one thing I wonder is if there's you've asked for the most challenging issues that they are facing as they wrap up their work, but maybe it's also kind of supports needed, or I'm not sure if there's not just identifying the problem, but actually helping us understand what they see as possible solutions.
Yeah. Is it something like, Julie, like, any piece of input they're looking for from the council to help them finish up, that kind of thing?
Right. And some of it may be just making sure there's broad awareness of the overall, like a reminder on the overall schedule. And in some ways ask if they feel like that will support them in getting timely input from the council to complete their work. Right. Like part of the point or the purpose of next week's meeting is it just felt like there wasn't a good check-in, right? And sort of at a point where we might be able to still provide assistance or guidance, or I'm not sure what the other words could be, but I think teeing that up here and making sure that they feel comfortable that the structure is as supportive as possible.
Great. That's great.
those
So
notes
I
for-
can adjust those. Oh, sorry, Liz. Yeah.
I was like, I got those notes for my next communication that goes out to them. So thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Yep.
Nice. And I can adjust the sort of guiding question on that, Liz. So let's make sure the guiding question you sent out is the same that ends up in the agenda. Okay. Great. Anything else? Okay. All right. Well, thanks, folks. I'm looking forward to next week. I think it's a good check-in. And we're going to be working feverishly to get some content out on that public input stuff so that the council has a little bit of lead time to look at it. And then we have some materials in real time to use. All right. Next up is the December 16th agenda. And there I just put some recommended sort of bullets here of the time. So if we think about the purpose of December 16th, it's a deadline, right? It's a deadline that we're imposing on the subcommittees to get their recommendations to the council, first of all. Second of all, it's an opportunity to present that work to the council so the council starts to chew on it and think about it. And it's a ton of content, right? If we have 3 substantive subcommittees all presenting it up. There is not a lot of brilliant thinking put in this, except how do we create space for each of these 3 substantive subcommittees to share what they've got, right? And what on the basis of what the council's been asking for and what you all as a steering committee have been asking for, what we've been pressing with the subcommittee co-chairs is what they need to deliver to the council is a full set of whatever their pathway strategies and actions proposed are in sort of their Excel document, right? The full list, which are lots, right? And we're asking for a handful of actions that they really want to highlight that could be part of the council's top, call it 30 or somewhere between top 20 and top 40 actions that the council wants to highlight to the legislature and the administration. So that's the 2 things we're asking them to deliver, like the full package, and then these, you know, a handful that they think are really, really worth calling people's attention to. And so they've been practicing a little bit of that on these input session calls, but I think there's still some evolution about how they want to present that to you as the council. All right, so that's me discussing this for a moment. I see some hands up, Jared, and then Jane.
Thanks, David. I'm just wondering, in the proposed agenda here, for each of the recommendations sections from the different subcommittees, is that assumed or intended to include time for clarifying questions and brief discussion? And if so, I wonder if it's worth explicitly calling that out. I could see how it could be read now as just a series of back-to-back presentations, and I think it's good to kind of intentionally carve out time for clarifying questions and some of the discussions that might emerge around. I mean, I see that there's a time in a later meeting for cross-cutting pathways, but just I think that this might end up being the first time that members of some subcommittees are seeing recommendations from other subcommittees, and just starting to think through some of the questions that might raise in terms of either understanding the recommendations or thinking through how they might connect to other recommendations. I guess that's a long way of saying, if we can explicitly carve out some time for questions and initial discussion after the presentations within this, I think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, and that certainly is the intent. So we can write it in a way that shows that intent. Jane?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple things as folks are thinking about this. One, I think subcommittees, and maybe this is a good spot just to highlight for Liz as she's keeping a running list of things to communicate with them. But I think subcommittees have been asking sort of like about how to present this and with clearer guidance. And I'd like to suggest, as steering committee members are talking about this, that understanding that there are a lot of pathway strategies and actions, again, that the focus should be on putting together the template, which is the Excel document, having that go out to the council for counselors to review, but then really spend time on their priority actions. And that is what they present, because I do think that, I don't know how many like subcommittees are going to present forward, but even if it's 10 each, I think understanding why those are priorities and what they are, and what they like, how they've come to those, is really the crux of sort of like starting to set the stage for what the sort of storyline is for the next climate action plan. And so I would encourage folks not to like use the templates we've been using for the input sessions, where it's like an overview of all of it, but really like focus on getting the spreadsheet in, and then focus just on a presentation and a template. And our office can help support that for subcommittees on just those priority actions. And to that last point, I would just say folks are still wanting a little more guidance on how to draw those priorities out. So we should talk about whether
that's needed for the subcommittees or it's needed for the council, how the council gets to their final list for the plan, but I think that will be important. And then my just final comment, and I'll stop talking for the steering committee, is that, David gave me too much credit about an exercise that I'm about to lead you through for the writing components. I really just want to highlight and talk about it with you all and start to come up with a flow of how we're going to determine writing responsibilities today. But I think that at the December meeting, that is probably a place, if there is capacity in the agenda, to set the stage for writing responsibilities, because when we come back in January, that is going to be sort of like head down, really trying to put pen to paper for the council, for the CAO, and the subcommittees are all going to have really detailed responsibilities. So starting to really speak to that would be great.
Thanks, Jane. Those are all helpful. Kelly?
Thanks. I only had a thought, and I know this is a very packed agenda already, but I thought it might be helpful if we had another public comment section, like before the break or something, just to give more. I mean, this is sort of what we were talking about if we adopt the
Yeah.
plan that we've done with subcommittees, we will need to probably sprinkle it in a little bit more. So
Yeah.
not sure how exactly to make that work and still allow time for everything else, but that would probably be a good idea.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, for sure. If we want to be consistent with the approach, yeah. Liz?
I don't know if you'll characterize my comment as helpful, just to say that right up front. I hear what Jane is saying about the December meeting and the desire to have, I would call it greater prioritization by subcommittee recommendation, right? And to start talking about writing. I have a real concern in looking at the schedule and knowing where our subcommittee is, that we just might want to be aware and maybe even take account of, through how we build the agenda, of the fact that two things. One, subcommittees haven't really yet at least absorbed, if not even in some cases heard from, other subcommittees on their recommendations. And it is, supposed to be a whole plan, right? And so I know in our subcommittee, we've struggled even among the task groups rolling up to the subcommittee to think about overlap and priority. And I have a feeling that will be at least as much of a effort once we start hearing across subcommittees. And so I just want to set a realistic expectation for the subcommittees and the members so that they don't feel like December is either overwhelming or potentially not successful, because we're building something in that just is not yet ready, since we are hearing and talking with each other about these substantively, really, for the first time at this meeting. Related to that, I have a concern that I'll just put out there without knowing what the solution is, of putting the cross-cutting pathways second rather than first. We've heard over and over again in our task group and subcommittee discussions just how critical those are, really. And in some ways, I feel that the last time we went through this process, they were developed afterward or developed toward the end, rather than perhaps what would be a more appropriate process of putting them up front and then having other recommendations drive from them. Because after all, those cross-cutting pathways are the things that I think we've all identified as extremely critical and relevant to every area. So that kind of blows up your, it's not a specific action on the agenda as framed, but a concern that we're trying to achieve too much too soon, and we're not prioritizing within this agenda the things most important to the subcommittees.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah. Challenging, right? Challenging comments, because how do we address that? I think I'm interested to talk about this with you all right now. One reaction I had when I heard Jane say, really focus that presentation on the priority actions. I think there's also a place to give like a really high level overview. And maybe, Liz, there's a place to be able to hedge a little bit on we're not quite there yet on nailing 100% priority issues, but actions, but here are some of the ones that are percolating up to the top, right? So there may be some hedging that subcommittees have to do around that because they may not have nailed it exactly by December 16th. I don't know how others feel about that, but I feel like I can imagine a template that we're asking each of the subcommittees to do that says, just list out the pathways and it's for strategy level quickly to show everyone where you're working more or less. And then say, here's the areas of focus where you think the highest priority actions are. And some might be more developed and some may be less. Or some like in ag and ecosystem, what I saw was they're doing like clusters of priority actions, which is one way to do it. Jane, I saw your hand go up on that.
Yeah, I really appreciated what Liz said about cross-cutting issues because having sat in on the first of the three of those different groups working on those with Liz, and I welcome Liz to follow up after, and then also helping take a lead on the workforce ones. I agree with Liz, like it's actually really, and it's a place where you're probably going to be pulling in perhaps recommendations from other subcommittees that haven't happened yet. So mindful that I'm anxious about the whole schedule. And I would suggest there could be other ways to sort of, I was going to say a terrible analogy of like skin the cat, but we could put forward the cross-cutting issues in December and do a similar sort of like perhaps still have all the spreadsheets due from the subcommittees and spend a total of an hour or something with the subcommittee co-chairs or subcommittee task leads doing some kind of sort of overview deciphering of what the subcommittees have put forward, but then do the specific priority actions focus for a January meeting. We only have one January meeting, so maybe there's two or something. But I don't disagree with Liz that there's more work to flow from the cross-cutting issues, having sat with those pathway strategies and actions, and appreciate the idea that they should be the basis for the other ones, understanding that they are, in theory, the ones that are the most impactful across all three of the areas of work.
Yeah, and they're all having their next meeting the first week of December with the aim to get them in like the best place that they could be after doing work on revision, and I'm supporting with outreach and to implementers and other things. So I think at that point, it will be helpful actually to get some feedback if there's anything that's still kind of like a question mark with cross-cutting.
Okay. How do others feel about that? Does that feel like a good approach? We're actually carving out time in this agenda, a real big chunk of time in this agenda to walk through the cross-cutting, and just for everybody's, memory jog. The cross-cutting areas, one is about compact development. I'm not quite land use and compact
Land
development.
use, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. The second one is about workforce, right? And there's a third one.
Education, but we're thinking about that also as more broadly, like communication and engagement.
Yeah, right. So those are the three cross-cutting areas that are, there's been this sort of additional process going on around that. And you all think, Jane and Liz Amler, you think there's people will be ready to present December 16th on that?
We'd be as ready as the subcommittees would be. Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's some decision points there. One is we could try to do it all, right? We could try to do the whole thing and just everybody gets less time, right? And so we can imagine just a very short handful of slides from each of those where it's like, this is the range of things we've been working on. Here's a couple of things we want to call out as we think are particularly important. And that's all. And everybody gets 10 minutes of presentation and, 10 minutes of Q&A kind of thing. How does that sound to folks? Or would you privilege one of the over the other, sort of, let's do cross-cutting and really spend most of the time on that and just a real quick hit on the subcommittees? But that, to me, Jane, it sounds like that would involve scheduling another meeting in January. How do others feel about that? Sounds good to you, Jared? Okay.
No, sorry, I accidentally hit the thumbs up. I was trying to hit the raise hand.
Okay, because your hand's up, that's why.
Um, yeah, I mean, if the choice is if we end up not having enough time to do both, I do think that it's important to have the starting point of what are the priority recommendations emerging from the subcommittees.
Yeah.
And I feel like until and unless we're grounded in that, it feels a little bit premature to dive too deep on cross-cutting. So if we can fit both and the agenda works that way, then great. But if not, I would lean towards wanting to start with the main priority recommendations from the subcommittees before we move to cross-cutting themes.
Got it. Okay. How about others? Kelly?
I'm really on the fence, but because I think Liz had a good point that those cross-cutting ones are really important and may inform other work. So I really would like to hear where that's headed. And I'm concerned about trying to cram too much in and not being able to really sit with any one recommendation, or we need a little bit of time here to digest this. So I don't know if there's a way to sort of split the difference and have a little bit more time to talk more about the cross-cutting issues, but then also get like a quicker overview of what the other subcommittees are working on and where their priorities are without trying to also look at those as deeply as the cross-cutting. I think I would prefer the cross-cutting to be a little bit more of a priority. I'm kind of the opposite opinion of what Jared was saying, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that's helpful, but that's what I think I would find useful, and I don't know. I'd love to hear what others are thinking.
Thanks, Kelly. I mean, just the math of it in terms of the amount of minutes in a 3-hour meeting, you could spend an hour and change on cross-cutting and an hour and change on, an hour and 20 on each, right? Cross-cutting and then an hour and 20 on all 3 subcommittees. So it's just, you could do that. You just have to be you have to be quite disciplined on what's being presented. Julie?
Can you pop the draft agenda back up on the screen, David?
Yeah, for sure. How does it do that? Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Here it comes. There we go.
Thanks. Okay. I just wondered if there was anything we could sort of drop off, but what you're saying is sort of nibble a little bit from everybody, right?
Yes, totally.
To take 5 minutes from just transitions, 5 minutes from cross sector,
I would
5
say
minutes from rural resilience, and 5 minutes from ag and ecosystems.
I would say quite a bit more. I would say take 15 minutes or more from each of the 3 subcommittees. So each subcommittee gets 10 minutes of presentation time and 10 to 15 minutes of discussion time. So let's say it's 25 minutes each.
Yep.
You have to be tight in your presentation. You could do that, and that's an hour and 15 minutes, right? Or something like that. And then that gives you another an hour and 15 minutes to do the 3 cross-cutting things. That I would do a deeper bite out of here is what I would do.
Okay. Thank you. It's just helpful to look at that. And yeah. Is there any part of this that could be taken up at the meeting next week? Like, could we, I'm not sure what was envisioned for the just transition reflection here. Sorry, not being on screen, it's harder to keep it straight. I think Kelly providing or leading a conversation around how the public comment is working. Is that correct? Is at the meeting next week as opposed to here on the agenda?
Right.
Is there an opportunity to, I guess, not have a just transition reflection given what we need to accomplish on December 16th?
Potentially, yeah. Or do something
And
very
sort of
short.
acknowledge part of what we're doing is providing more time for public comment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice way to think about it. Yeah. Jane?
Yeah, I think what Julie just suggested is actually nice because the just transitions reflection is just a policy decision that you all have made to hold at the beginning of every meeting. So if you're complementing that with an more public engagement, then that makes a lot of sense, right? Like that is the component of the agenda. I did just want to say, just as you're all talking about this too, is understanding that we really won't be able to make decisions or set the subcommittees up on guidance, like on where to go. The council doesn't meet again till January 27th. And that would mean a whole more than a month of time that we would probably lose around writing or decisions, knowing that we're striving for a draft in March. So just wanted to put that forward.
What are you thinking, Jane? Well, in terms of a recommendation there?
I think we should meet January 13th, but I don't know if that's MLK Day or if it's the next
It's
week.
not.
Yeah. So I think we should meet January 13th. But if we're really trying to have a draft by March to go out to public comment with, it just means a intensity over the winter, I think.
Yeah.
And then a pause around April and May to go out and do engagement, but we've done our work.
Yeah. Secretary Moore?
I support Jane's, well, I should say that and look at my calendar too, but in general, I think pushing up the January meeting earlier is important. I mean, to me, this is sort of two sides of the same coin, and scheduling a meeting next week is, I don't think we have sort of the opportunity to discuss that's necessary to support actually drafting substantive comment or content for revisions to the plan, and in order to achieve the March deadline so that we can have robust public engagement on the draft.
Yeah. Okay, so concretely, let me just try to see if I can name what's happening here. It sounds like what you'd like to do is to create space on the December 16th agenda for cross-cutting issues. And that means doing it all, though, having the subcommittees present as well will give them a tight template and give them something like 10 minutes each, 10, 12 minutes each to present, and then 10, 15 minutes of discussion on the back end. We'll have the same thing for the three cross-cutting pieces. And it's really just like a huge content dump onto the council, where the council is starting to wrap its head around the full suite of things that are really going to stand out as important. Then you'd like to meet on, or at least that's the proposal, to meet on January 13th, as opposed to waiting all the way to the 27th. I recommend you keep the 27th. And there was some talk about making that in person, actually, I heard at one point. I can't remember now. But really what you're doing on the 13th and the 27th is you're wrestling through some of the trickier issues, right? Things are going to require some deliberation on the council for you to feel comfortable putting it out there in a draft later in the winter, right? So I can imagine setting an agenda where you're like, it's not just an overview of everything. It's like quite specific, like, ooh, these are tricky ones, right? The subcommittees may or may not have reached agreement on them, things like that. And we can create some discussion time for the council to wrap its head around it. So we do that on January 13th. We do it again on the 27th. And then the February meeting is about the technical analysis. We've already talked about that, the cap and invest, plus the business as usual scenario type analysis. And then we meet again. I think we have 1 or 2 meetings in March to really get the draft together. And by then we'll be looking at drafts. There's the in-person meeting, March 10th. That was it. Okay. There we're like starting to look at a draft and really feeling like we understand what we might put out to public comment. Okay. Does that sound right then? The adjustments to December 17th, 16th, excuse me, and then adding a January 13th meeting to get into content. Does anybody think that's a terrible idea? Just to check in real quick. All right, let's do it. Super. Thanks, folks. So I will rework this agenda based on what you just said. And we can start right away messaging to the subcommittee co-chairs, and we can talk about this next week as well when we're all in the meeting about what we really are looking for them to present to us on the 16th, and then what we would want as sort of supporting materials for counselors to be able to read. Okay, great. The next thing we were going to talk about is the writing responsibilities, right? So all this needs to translate into actually writing an updated plan. Jane has shared before a table, right? Remember that table? And I think Jane, well, I'll let you explain, but my sense is that table was a great starting place, but there actually is some greater specificity that's needed about who's taking the first whack at it, right? Who's actually grabbing the pen and starting to write? Who's doing the reviewing? Or maybe, Jane, you explain exactly what you think is what we need to put in place right now so this thing works January, February,
Yeah,
March.
so I was trying to find it so I could put it in the chat, but I can share it on screen in a minute. You'll recall that we as a subcommittee went through and reviewed the chapters from the original climate action plan, modified some of the titles, added some additional ones, and then clarified where responsibility sits, whether it's with the Climate Council itself, whether it's with the subcommittees of jurisdiction, or whether there are some components that can be initially drafted out of the Climate Action Office in support of the broader plan. So that's all still relevant. At some point, though, the Climate Council and/or the subcommittees need to translate to actual people, names of folks who are writing those initial drafts. I think that there is an obvious way to do that with the subcommittees around sort of the folks who I know who are managing task groups can lead the transportation drafting, or folks who are leading the health section for rural resilience can draft that section as a first step. All of that will be coalesced and pulled together by the Climate Office in support of the March meeting so that we have a singular draft for consideration. But it's really the question around the council responsibilities, and some of those things come sooner rather than later. For some of the things that are responsible for the Climate Council, yourselves are the executive summary, things like that won't come till the end, till May and June. But there are components of the work that we put forward for March. And so I wanted to just, as I said, David gave me too much credit around an exercise, but I wanted to suggest that we as a steering committee could think about how we put forward to the council actual drafting responsibilities of those sections for March in particular, and then ask you all how you'd like to sort of start to deliver that. It does sound like we have some time, and we can do that either at a December meeting or focus more at the early January meeting now on drafting that is for the Climate Council. So it might mean that we do have some time and don't have to go through it right now for specific responsibilities. But then second to that, my expectation is that we can talk about this, Liz and I, with subcommittee co-chairs and subcommittees more specifically to look at the timeline once we get through that December push to actually talk about authorship and templates for that space. So I don't really have much more to say about it other than that an acknowledgement that it's nice that we have given it some jobs and we're all in agreement about who's drafting what, but at some point we're going to have to really think about leadership in that space. It looks like Jared thumbs up again, but wanted to raise his hand. So Jared, go ahead.
Awesome. It's
This
the
time,
problem with phone.
this time both reactions were accurate. I agree with what you said, Jane, and I'll just give a specific example and maybe a way to put a even finer point on it, which I believe you were alluding to, is I think that it would be helpful if for each chapter we put next to that the name of the lead author or the point person who will be responsible for delivering a draft, even if it will be a task group or a subcommittee. My worry is that if it remains kind of, the main entity responsible is a committee or a task group, it's less clear who, the end of the day, has to convene a writing group or who has to deliver a draft by a certain time. So one of the things that we did in the science and data subcommittee meeting yesterday was to go through our sections and identify lead authors who will, they'll work with other people for drafting, for review, but they'll be the point person on delivering that chapter. So for climate change in Vermont, it's Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux. For the Vermont climate economy, Ken Jones will be there. For the scientific underpinning of the cap, that will be me, just by way of example. And I think that that's probably helpful to get to that point on each chapter so that things don't fall through the cracks by having broad subcommittee or task group responsibilities. Not that it's all on that person's shoulders to write the whole thing, but to manage the process of drafting with others and be the point person for delivering a draft.
Great. Jared, thank you very much for that. So what I'd like to suggest then that is, and perhaps this is a task that falls to myself and Liz between now and the December meeting, just to start to share this out with people and we start to fill it in, is to update this. You sort of get rid of the fact that we have some new titles. This will be memorialized, but as we've made changes now, show what the new chapter name is. Don't need to carry forward the old chapter name anymore. Have the new chapter names, have the responsibility, have a specific due date now, because we have climate council meetings that are actually set to try to think about the actual specific due date. Have the responsibility around climate council versus the subcommittee, and then have lead author next to it. And I can start to fill that in, what you just said about Ken, yourself, and Leslie Ann, and then work with the other subcommittees to fill those lead authors in for the other component chapters too, responsible to them. And then the question for all of you is really like, how do you see us sort of best pursuing that same specificity for the chapters that sit with the Climate Council in particular? And would you like to lead that at a public meeting discussion, or have some sort of outreach done on your behalf from the Climate Action Office to maybe just folks who, like, with professional judgment, we expect might be either have capacity, interest, or expertise in writing those chapters? So that's sort of the question, like, how much behind the scenes work would you like the CAO to do to develop the leads for the council chapters, or would you prefer to take that on at a public meeting?
Can we look at those chapters for a second,
Yeah.
Jane?
So an example of one, like these ones are all later, because the letter from the council acknowledgements, like the letter from the council last time was led by the steering committee. And I think some of this stuff, like, there's an assumption perhaps that the steering committee are folks who have more time, but I'm not sure if that'll be true. But like the letter from the council, I believe, Liz, you might have been the lead author last time on that on behalf of the council, or Lauren or Chris, but something like that. Let's look at one down here. public engagement. This, like, Just Transitions did the exact same thing that Science and Data has done, and largely because Science and Data and Just Transitions are really focused on sort of their broader chapters as the bulk of their work. They're able to really be thinking about drafting already, which is great. This is one that I think, Jared, like, I'd be curious, Jared, Liz, who are on cross-sector, we, all the specific chapters on the transportation, buildings, electricity, pathways, we left to sit with cross-sector, but then we acknowledge that the overview, sort of the broad strokes that sets the stage for the mitigation chapters, we have with the Climate Council, and that would be due in February. And so that would be an example of one. I'm not sure if that still makes sense here or if it makes sense with cross-sector specifically, but that's one example. Oh, cross-cutting pathways. We did acknowledge that while Liz and I are really supporting that work, there was just the overview chapter section would be done concurrently collaboratively between the CAO and the Climate Council. The same with the Climate Action Plan progress assessment and implementation. That's a chapter that would be informed by the work that we did for last January's council meeting that looked at a progress report from the last Climate Action Plan, but there was concern that that should be collaborative with the council to make sure the right tone was set for that chapter about progress versus lack of progress. So there's not, the rest of the other chapters are more straightforward and come with the end of the plan. So it's just a handful of those. And so, I mean, I could imagine authors for those. So maybe it is us like for the one that is the mitigation, it likely should be counselors who sit on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. And it might be us reaching out to those 4 or 5 counselors who are on cross-sector and sort of letting them decide amongst themselves who would be the lead author to coordinate on that, to draft that on their behalf.
That's great. Any questions on that? Jared, I don't know if that's a new hand or an old hand, but feel free to jump in.
It's new. Two things. I mean, one kind of default kind of starting position could be a request to the chairs of if there's a broader thing to write that's, you know, like the context or the summary around cross-sector recommendations, maybe that starts with, you know, a request to Rich and Melissa as the co-chairs. And if that's not possible, then that subcommittee and counselors discuss that. I did want to ask one specific question, Jane. This came up in our Science and Data subcommittee meeting, and we can take it offline if it's a longer conversation. But if you scroll down towards the end of this outline, and it's in, right there. Sorry, a little bit higher. So we're talking about doing something different with cross-cutting themes, and we noted that benefits and burdens of energy choices, that was like 3 paragraphs within the cross-cutting themes chapter. It wasn't a separate chapter, and I was wondering if that was by chance a mistake, that was supposed to be taken out because it was one of the cross-cutting themes. It wasn't a separate chapter. I think our thinking was that that would be addressed in the kind of climate effects on the economy and the Vermont energy economy, and not its own standalone chapter, since it was embedded in the cross-cutting themes piece that is being taken out and done differently. So just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, I thank you for catching that. I did not note that myself when I reviewed it. So I would be supportive of making sure that if you all feel like that could be captured in that chapter, removing it from here.
Yep. I think that would be my recommendation, and that was the tone of our discussion. It's in Science and Data.
Okay.
I think that, I mean, I guess if people don't have strong concerns, I think the goal should be that the CAO work to complete this between now and December, where we have the new chapter names, this is updated, and then work behind the scenes to make sure there's a lead author. I wouldn't think that we would step out of line by helping to find lead authors for the council. There's no need to do that at a public meeting, except that we could put forward the list as contemplated once it's complete at a public meeting, so that folks can see the structure and responsibilities in totality once we get that.
Everybody okay with that? Kelly?
I think that sounds great. This is about something else, and I apologies if someone already mentioned this while had to step away. At one point in a previous meeting, we had talked about updating the land acknowledgement. I think Bram made that suggestion, and I also agree. I think it would be really valuable to have a similar exercise to what we did last time. It was having Judy Dow go through that with us was really valuable.
Yeah, there's multiple folks on that call who said that would be helpful. And last time we did it, folks were in person. I can't remember if we were in person, but no, we weren't in person. But she got us like go outside and stand in the
Yeah.
Um,
There were
okay.
a lot of us in person. There were some in person, some online, but maybe we do that at the March meeting, I might suggest, and try to, since we know that's an in-person meeting.
Yeah. Okay. But bottom line is, it seems like an exercise that many of you feel it would be beneficial to do again. Okay. Anything else on that? Jane, did you need any other input on that? Are you good? Okay, great.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. With that, we're kind of at the end of our agenda. Why don't we, if folks are here, members of the public who've been observing us or non-steering committee members, this is a time for input if folks would like to give input on what we've been talking about. So I'll just pause to say any public input right now on the things we've been working on this morning. Okay. Super. Let me just go back to our agenda. Was there anything else we need to do? I don't think so. That was it. Before we sign off, anything else that we need to pay attention to before we show up tomorrow, next week at our meeting? We have one more steering committee meeting ahead of the 16th, I believe. Liz, you probably know that more off the top of your head.
The 9th.
The 9th? Okay. So we will come back together on the 9th. That's Monday morning, and we'll look at a more detailed agenda for the 16th. In the meantime, though, next Wednesday, let's talk with our subcommittee co-chairs about what we're expecting from them on the 16th. And then Jane and Liz, Amler, and others are going to need to make some templates and things like that for presenting, like a PowerPoint template that subcommittees and the cross-cutting groups could use for some consistent presentations. I think that's it, folks. Anything else from any of you?
I would benefit from just hearing if there's any update on counselor appointments. Because,
yes.
sorry, just while I have folks interested in the Senate appointments, and then while Bram isn't here, Bram's still with us, but he'll be stepping down, we all know, in January now. So that one will need to work with the speaker to appoint, and I know Bram has been starting those conversations, but we'll need a new seat for him. And then just curious about the youth or resilience rep.
My understanding is that those are still in progress without an announcement yet, but that the Senate Committee on Committees has that on their to-do list and is considering nominations. Just one other quick thing in terms of subcommittee composition, and we can discuss this more offline, but when I sent the most recent email out, there were a couple of subcommittee members whose emails bounced because they've left the position that they were in when they were appointed. Elizabeth Palchak has left the Sustainability Office at UVM, and Madison Shropshire has left Madison County Regional Planning Commission. So I don't know if that means anything in the short term in terms of considering reappointments. I think we're kind of in the thick of the work rather than trying to add, we've got to get the work done with the existing subcommittee we have probably rather than seeking to add new folks. But I just wanted to give a heads up that it sounds like those folks have moved on to different positions, and we may want to update the subcommittee member list. I can try to reach out to them, although the emails I had for them bounced. I don't know if you've heard anything, Jane. We can discuss that offline.
Yeah, I'll just put a pin in it that we should, Jared, if there are folks who are no longer coming to science and data or have different roles, let's Liz and you connect about cleaning that up and reaching out to them.
Yeah, because it could matter in terms of quorum. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And Bram, just seeing you now. Welcome. Congratulations. We were just actually, your name was mentioned moments ago because we were talking about appointments and the need starting in January to think about your appointment replacement.
Yes, I have forwarded some possible candidates to the speaker, and don't know that I can do any more than that.
Okay. Thanks, Bram. All right. We were just finishing up, like literally about to hang up. Is there anything else, folks, before we hang up? Okay. Super. All right. We'll send around some notes from this call. We'll see everybody next Wednesday at the council meeting. And I look forward to getting into the real thick of it. We're about to jump right in. So
Thanks, everybody.
all right. Take care, everybody.
Fly by.
Yeah.